Welcome everyone to the third day of Barn Week. We're of course thrilled and been having fun all week bringing together barn enthusiasts for a week-long celebration of our state's historic barns and of course the people who love them. I'm Jennifer or Jay Mortensen. With me is Chris Moore, and we work for the Washington Trust for Historic Preservation, who's hosting this Barn Week. We are Washington's only statewide nonprofit advocacy organization, and we work to build an ethic that preserves historic places through education, collaboration, and stewardship. We're dedicated to saving the places that matter in Washington state and building, supporting, and sustaining communities through historic preservation. And for the past 13 years, we've been honored to support and partner with the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation in managing the Heritage Barn Grant Program, which offers grants to historic barns to help preserve our rural landscape here in Washington. So if you're just joining for the first time today, you might be wondering what this is all about. So as a quick background, there was a barn that was owned by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that needed to be dismantled. And so as mitigation for that, we created this Barn Week educational event, and then also that barn was dismantled and the materials were reused in other historic barns. And Chris actually is going to highlight one of those projects at the end of toward the end of today's presentation, so you'll get to see that. So as most of you probably know, this is a week-long celebration, so don't forget to jump on social media, tag us at PreserveWA on your favorite platform, use the hashtag Barn Week so we can see your posts of your own barns or your favorite barns across the state, and we can repost them. And we're going to be featuring a lot of extra content too. We're doing a daily trivia with prizes, our Barnogram prizes, which are super fun. And then also we're doing a featured barn of the day as well with a little bit of history and information. So yeah, definitely get on social, participate in the stuff we're posting, and also post your own stuff and tag us and tag Barn Week as well. So today we're sharing some really fantastic transformations and restorations from the past 13 years of the Heritage Barn Grant Program. And tomorrow is our last day where we will, as I mentioned, wrap up Barn Week with a behind the scenes tour of these two beautiful historic barns with preservation expert Harrison Goodall. So tomorrow's presentation will also be on Zoom at noon, but you do have to register separately. So be sure to visit our website at preservewad.org/barnweek. And there's a bunch of links going in the chat box for all this information. So be sure to check it out there. All of the attendees are in listen and watch mode only. But we encourage you to participate in the chat. And then also if you have specific questions about the content, go ahead and put that in the Q&A, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the presentation and do some questions at the end. So, and then of course, if you're tuning in on Facebook Live, which we think is working today, go ahead and put your questions in the comments there, and we will get them filtered over to us here on Zoom, and we can answer them. So earlier the better, get your questions out there so we know they're there. And then finally, we do have an email list that you can sign up for, and we'll put that link in the chat box too because it's a little longer. But you can be on that list where we'll send out information about all things barns, future grants, salvage material availability, all that kind of stuff. That's where we put it out into the world. So without further ado, I think we'll get started. And Chris is manning the slideshow for us today, so I'll just have
so be careful, watch out.
Yeah. So yeah, let's hit the next slide. So to begin, I wanted to give a brief overview of the Heritage Barn Grant Program, which is part of the Heritage Barn Initiative, which was established by an act of Washington State Congress in 2006. So the program both created the Heritage Barn Register and the grant program, which is housed in the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. And they contract with us to help manage that program. And so it's been a really strong, great partnership for us. And we've really enjoyed being able to participate. And just a few quick stats, as you see on the slide here, we've had a total of 519 applicants requesting over $12 million for barn rehab support. And we've been able to award 122 grants in the past 7 rounds. So it's a biannual cycle. So it's once every 2 years. And so 13 years, 7 rounds. Those grant awards have totaled $2.6 million in award money, and it's a matching program, but the match has resulted in $3.5 million in private investment on top of the 2.6 of the grant dollars, and that's helped create 446 jobs, which is really excellent because a lot of those jobs are really local and craftsperson based, and that's something we're really proud to support. So in order to be eligible to apply for a grant, should you be interested in that in the future, a few details about that process. Your barn needs to be listed on the register, the Heritage Barn Register, which was created especially for this program, or on the National Register, which is a little bit a sort of more complicated process, but the barn register is totally fine. And the grants may be used for stabilization of a historic barn and particularly construction costs. And then of course, the third bullet, the projects need to preserve the historic character. So they do need, the grant projects do need to follow historic standards and use appropriate materials. And that's part of the reason for the grants, is to provide some extra funding to be able to do these projects in the historically appropriate way. So a quick overview of the criteria or the evaluation criteria for the grants. You see the list up there: historic and cultural significance, the urgency of the project, how well your proposed project does preserve that historic character and follow those standards, and then of course contribute to the life of the structure. We do require the barns be visible from a public road because it is public money. And then leveraging other funding or support, the readiness of the applicant, and then we do also pay attention to the geographic distribution of the barns across the state and across our many counties. And then, not required, but special consideration does include barns that are still in agricultural use, barns listed on the National Register, that sort of higher status, as I mentioned earlier, and then anything that's a particularly outstanding example of building type or era. So that's a quick overview of the eligibility requirements or the evaluation of the grants, and then from a kind of functional standpoint, the grants are matched, as I mentioned before. So if you are applying, you do need to show in your application that you are matching each state dollar with your own contribution, whether it's your own cash paying for things or donated labor or materials or something like that. So the grant can only be up to 50% of the total, overall project cost. And then the grants are reimbursement, so the work does need to be completed first, and then you submit for a reimbursement to receive the grant money after the work is completed. I have the average grant award up there, about $20,000 to $25,000, although it does range really all over the place. We get some very small grants and have gone up to about $50,000 in some of our very biggest grants for a total project costs of over $100,000, which we do have, I think, at least one on here that we're going to go over today that is that much. And then, very important, a property easement is required 5, 10, or 15 years, depending on the amount of your grant. And it's only applicable to the barn building itself. The property easement doesn't provide public access to your property. It just says that you're going to maintain that barn for that period of time. It's not going to be torn down, and then any changes that you make will also follow the historic standards for that period of time. And that does get attached to the property deed. So that's a legal a legally binding document. So, okay, that's the quick, the quick overview. If and when the program is continued to be funded in the next biennium, and we are able to continue to manage that program, we do anticipate those applications will be released next year, late summer 2021, and be due in October 2021. And at that time, I would also be doing probably virtual barn workshops if things continue as they are. So if you want a much more detailed presentation about the grants themselves and the application process, stay tuned for that. And of course, sign up for our barn emails, because that's where that information goes out. Or get listed on the register, because all the register listed barns also receive mailed letters as well. So I will throw it over to Chris to start with our first featured grant rehabilitation project.
Yeah, great. Thank you. This is the fun part of it, right? Going through the projects that have actually happened. And I know we went over the grant portion of it pretty quickly, the kind of nuts and bolts. So if you do have questions, throw those in the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to those at the end of the presentation. And of course, you can always reach out to us with more in-depth questions you might have about the grant process. So the first barn that we want to focus is the ERICKSON Farmstead in Thurston County, and a big thanks to the owners of this barn. I know Dick Erickson, I believe, is on the line, so watching today. So they've been just wonderful stewards. We like to show this one because it's such a great example of an overall farm complex. And we talk about those farm complexes as really intact agricultural landscapes with multiple buildings that have multiple purposes that all served to make a farm operational overall. And this is a great historical image. I think this is from around 1915 or so, right around there. And what's so remarkable is when you see the current images, you can see how all of those, or really many of those buildings are still there. Here's one angle, and then here's another angle that actually gives a better overview, albeit from the other side, of all those structures. Jay mentioned earlier that eligible barns can be on the Heritage Barn Register or the National Register. This property happens to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places as well, and I just want to call out the buildings on this property that are contributing to that designation. The house is, of course, there's a great farmhouse on this property, but in addition to that, there is a woodshed egg shop building, woodshed egg shop and summer kitchen building. It served all three of those purposes. There's a granary, a silo, a milk house, a chicken house, a brooder house, an outhouse, a tractor shed, and a garage, all of which are, again, contributing to the National Register listing. And so we wanted to show it because, yes, it's this great complex, but also because the work that was done was really a great example of how to follow the standards overall. This property has been kept in really, really good shape overall. The owners are wonderful stewards of it, but still over time, deterioration occurs. They are wood frame buildings. It's in a wet landscape. And so they needed to do some repairs, some rehab. What was really phenomenal about this is so much of the original material was intact and in place. You can see some of the cow stanchions on the upper left-hand side, original flooring. So the program, the grant project was really designed to just repair some of these and fix up some of the wood rot that you see in some of the bottom ends of the boards. So here, new floorboards being laid. They had to work on the underpinnings, the foundation logs for that floor, but get a new floor nice and straight and above the dirt ground here. You see some of the framing that went in to help support this relatively large barn. It had those kind of, on the thinner side, those round logs, almost those poles as rafters. So those needed to be supported to prevent the continued kind of deflection of them from the weight of the roof. And then you see, to my mind, what was this really great intervention, so to speak, of rather than replacing these siding boards wholesale, really just cutting off those components that were deteriorated and then really splicing them in. You can see in some of the siding right in the center of the picture, some of those circular saw cuts. that are around here, and you don't want to lose that. Those are some of those great elements, the great patina on these barns. So rather than replace the boards wholesale, they were able to kind of splice them in. That's not always possible. In some cases, boards are just gone to the point where it does need to be replaced wholesale, and you'll see some of those as well. But this was a great way to minimize the intervention, so to speak. And here again, just more examples of how that was done. And of course, they were one of our early grant recipients in the first round. So today, if you were to go by there, you wouldn't even notice the new from the old barn, the new wood now has weathered to the point that it's probably, unless you get up real close, indistinguishable, at least from a color standpoint, from the original material. So just a really great way to implement the project. Moving to the PAQUET Place barn, this is in Columbia County, and this is a rather, one of our more dramatic ones, but you can see it sits out there in just kind of grassy lowlands, but out by the Palouse, of course. And so it clearly needed a lot of work. And this is one where the siding boards, because of their brittleness, you probably couldn't do the same thing as you did with the prior barn that was shown. So sadly, this barn, they had started some work and started to get going on their grant, and a big windstorm came through and knocked it down from where it had been. And it was a lot of back and forth with the owners and talking about, well, can we do this? What will insurance cover? And thankfully, they were really committed to doing the work, and they were really committed. They were able to find a new contractor after this occurred, a contracting team that just loves working with old barns and old structures, and had a bit of salvage material on hand from other buildings that they were then able to put into this barn. They went in there, they looked at what the framing and structural system of this barn was, and determined that they could essentially reconstitute that, recreate that framing. And there was some material, of course, left that they could use that was in here. But they put it back up, got it straight, put it on a new pony wall foundation around the outside and footings on the inside to get it back up straight. And you can see where they, again, replicated the original framing structure that was in there, added a few elements to help, again, with things like roof deflection and some stability. But overall, it is the exact same framing structure that was in place at the time this barn was constructed. And ultimately, the barn got put back all the way, and now will hopefully last another 100 years sitting there in the Palouse. Just a wonderful rehabilitation story, and the meticulous nature in which almost board by board the contractors worked with the family to get this thing back. It was really wonderful.
And not to mention a brand new roof as well to keep it standing for a long time.
Yep.
All right, we're going to stay on the east side and talk next about the Plucker barn. This was a really special project to be involved in, just because this barn has been in the family a long time, and it was really a big family effort. And we actually had the pleasure of Ron Plucker wrote an article about this barn for our quarterly magazine, This Place, and talked all about kind of the history of the area and his family's history, and kind of where the barn and the settlers were situated in that. So moving on, we will see. Oh yeah, so here's a couple more before shots, and then an image that Ron sent of the barn under construction originally. Really great historic image there. And I put the image in the upper right in here as well, because I wanted to note that they actually, before they applied and received a grant, did a lot of work resituating their barn on a new concrete foundation themselves. And so obviously we wanted to continue to support the rehabilitation of this barn through the barn grant. So they were doing a good job taking care of the barn already, and we were happy to jump in with the barn grant and help continue that project. So as I mentioned, this was really a family effort. You can see the whole family, many generations there on the left, working on this project. And I believe this is the weather side of the barn, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong. So there was quite a bit more replacement on this side than all the other sides. But like the ERICKSON barn, the Pluckers did take very good care of only really replacing what was not reusable or repairable. So as I've had the pleasure to walk around the barn, go ahead and go to the next slide, Chris. You can really see, and you can kind of see it in this photo a little bit of the window, where you see a little bit more deteriorated wood, and then this more smooth wood below. So you've got that combination of old and new, which after painted, obviously you take 5 steps back, you can't tell, but when you get up close, you can really see that the barn has both components. And then I just threw the interior photo in because it's a gorgeous space, beautiful barn.
Cathedral-like, yeah.
Exactly. Even though most of their work was to the exterior for their grant project, obviously, we love looking at beautiful interior photos as well. So go ahead and hit the next slide, Chris. Here it is at the end. You got a little preview at the beginning of the slideshow. All painted, and then you can also in the bottom picture there see the side of the barn with the windows as well. So such a great project, fun family to work with, and of course, if you want more details, check out our magazine. We can throw a link to that out to all the participants in the follow-up email. I'll be sure to link to that. So moving along. Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention that they have their barn grant sign posted inside the barn with historic photos of the family. And it's just a real pleasure to be involved in a project where the family is really invested and considers the grant project like really a part of their story and their history of the barn. So that we wanted to include a picture of that too, because we're proud of to be a part of that. So next we'll move over to Clallam County, the LOTZGESELL barn. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce that name, but it's called Lavender Connection now. It's a agro-tourism barn. They grow and dry lavender and create lavender products for the Squim Lavender Festival. This was one of the big ones. You can see the total project cost was over $100,000. And again, a family project. So you can see some before pictures here. You can see that really swoopy roof line there. That was one of the big issues to address in this project. Then of course the deteriorating shingle roof there. So go ahead, Chris. I did want to call out Big Red. This is the this is the forklift that on the left you can see literally held the barn up during the winter as they were working on this project. That sagging part of the roof, the family definitely said that this forklift saved the project in helping hold it up, and then the posed picture on the right. Go ahead. Go next. So they did some post repair, and here you see them installing some new concrete footers, and this was a really important stabilization step for the project. And then you see the roof repair and rafter work, and I like these pictures on this picture on the left, upper left, because you can see that they kept as many of the historic rafters as they could, and the ones that had to be replaced, they literally hand hewn them to match. And so this is another really great example of following the standards and really paying attention to the historic materials, only replacing what's necessary, and keeping keeping it as close as possible when you do have to replace. So here is the roof replacement project. They originally, I think, wanted to do a metal roof, but even after a lot of the stabilization and the fixing of the rafters, you never quite get right back to plumb. And so in a lot of their talks with some roofing companies, they ended up deciding to go with wood shingles again, which I think was a big part of the overall project expense, because there was a little bit more flexibility in that material to be able to completely cover that barn roof. So go ahead and go to the next slide, Chris, and you can see the incredibly beautiful shingle roof there. And then of course on the right we've got the family up there with the reconstructed cupolas as well. So this was a really beautiful project and a fun project to be involved in. And if you're able to travel to the Sequim Valley, they are open to the public during the Lavender Festival time, and they do public they have a little shop in there, and of course sell their lavender goods. And so if you're interested, you can stop by Lavender Connection. All right, and this one got a little bit of a preview in Michael Hauser's presentation yesterday. These are the SEITZ barns owned by the Fraser family now in Walla Walla. So this is a really special project. They actually applied several years ago, and for a variety of reasons, the project didn't quite work out, and so they ended up declining the grant. I think that was in 2011, Chris, or 2009. But they straightened some things out and came back and proposed the project again, and we were so happy to be able to support these barns because they're so unique and so beautiful. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, Chris. Here's a close-up of the big barn. They're octagonal barns, and the project on these ones really focused on the foundation work, which ended up being a little more extensive as it often is, and then of course the siding rehab and some window and door rehab. So here's some work on the barn. You can see the lumber helping hold the barn in place as they work on replacing that concrete foundation. And you'll notice that they actually had that roof replaced relatively recently, which was a really great, important step in keeping the barns weather tight until they were able to do this additional work on the foundation and the siding. So again, a great example of a family being excellent stewards of historic barns is getting that roof on. That's a super important piece, which you'll hear more about tomorrow in our field school. And then here's a close-up of that foundation work. Again, it ended up being a larger portion of the project than first assumed. Of course, that happens in a lot of our projects where you make your best guess and you don't really know till you get in there and you start the work and you start getting more into the materials. Luckily, this family was not deterred by the additional work and carried on, and we'll see in the next photos some pictures of the exterior work. Oh, here's some siding being replaced on the left, and then some window work on the right, and then you also see the primer there for the exterior as well. So go to the next slide. Here's more in process, some windows being installed and some more painting. And then I think the next slide is our last slide with the final painting. And there's the family there, Bill and Libby Fraser on the left, and Gino, their son-in-law and contractor, on the right. And we also wanted to mention that this project received an award from the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation for they give an award out for barn rehabilitation every year at their annual State Historic Preservation Officer Awards, SHPO Awards, and so we wanted to be sure to mention that as a part of this grant project, and they were super thrilled to receive the award, and of course we think it's an awesome project as well. All right, I think back to Chris for our last barn.
It is an awesome I mean, all of these are awesome projects, and the kind of perseverance and courage it takes to embark on some of these is always amazing to me. And I give the barn owners just great credit to really get into it, because as Jay said, sometimes you get started and you just find this is true with a lot of preservation projects, working with historic buildings, historic sites. You get going on something and you find things that you didn't necessarily anticipate. And this barn is an example of this in a little bit of a different way. I think they knew a lot of what needed to be done here. What they did not anticipate happening, and this came just relatively soon after they received their grant, got notification of their grant, What happened is, I don't know what it is with windstorms, but there was another windstorm that came down and just blew over this barn. And people look at this slide and I have to convince them that no, I did not take this image with a fisheye lens. This is exactly how the barn kind of fell in on itself and just sort of curdled, so to speak. And that's what it looked like. And at this point, you know, there was some real question again, geez, are we going to continue with this grant? And the owners, Roy and Karen Kleinsmith, who are just absolutely wonderful people. Roy was kind of scratching his head and not certain, but Karen was determined, and that determination led to a great outcome. There's Roy and Karen as they were kind of midway through. But we also like to show this because of the heavy machinery in the right hand of this frame. Jay mentioned the matching component that the grants have. That match can come in the form of cash match. You know, you get $10,000 in grants and you match it with $10,000 in cash, but it can also come in donated services or equipment or labor. And this barn in Adams County, not too far from Richland, and there is actually an international crane company in Richland that somehow the Kleinsmiths either knew them or got acquainted with them, and really what came out of this is they told their story and said what happened and what they're trying to do. The owner of the company essentially donated the services of this crane for a couple of weeks while the contractors worked underneath to prop the barn back up. And so, you know, they had to pay for the crane operators. They needed to pay the labor, but the value of having a crane of this magnitude on site for 2 weeks, it was, I want to say it was like $15,000 or $18,000 or something like that in terms of donated equipment for this project that they could count toward their match. And it's really what enabled this project to happen. They simply would not have been able to do it were it not for the generosity of Lamson Crane Company. So they hooked the barn up, basically attached the roof line, suspended it from the air while they worked on putting the structural components back in place. And amazingly, you know, you go back to that first image, the walls in some cases didn't entirely snap. They just sort of bent and folded. And when they were able to lift the roof back up, things kind of popped back into, I won't say total plumb, but they popped back into a realm of straightness, I guess is a way to be able to say it. But after that, after they were able to get the structural components inside back in place, they were able to work on some of the kind of the L's of this barn, if you will, the side aisles, and ultimately get a new roof on it, get it painted. They reconstructed the cupola as well, got that roofed, and in the end, able to have basically a brand new barn that is absolutely historic with a surprisingly less new material than you would have thought. Again, if you look at the siding, much of the siding on either of the gable ends are original. They were able to reuse that, and you know, new sticks, new structural posts inside, but really just an incredible amount of work that went into this barn. And again, that perseverance that I talked about earlier. So this is always a fan favorite. You know, we love to show this one,
Every
and it kind of gets, yeah, it always gets kind of the oohs and ahs there. But it is really a wonderful barn to look at. And it's actually just in a really interesting location as well. It sits in Benge, Washington, in Adams County, and it's really at the crossroads of both the Colville and the Mulan Trail. Early Spokane, Seattle, Portland Railroad went by and was inside of this barn. So just from that standpoint and being in a historic landscape, it's really it's really quite remarkable. Okay, what I want to do is now talk about the barn salvage program, and this has been an ongoing program that is also connected to what we've been talking about all week. This big yellow barn that is in or was in Little Rock in Thurston County, and we talked about the fact that this barn was owned by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It is located in part of the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge. And you could see from the barn had been vacant for years. It had been as part of the refuge for a long time. So there was not a clear use for it as a functioning portion of the refuge. And it really was deteriorated to the point that a lot of its structural integrity had been compromised. And so again, working with Fish and Wildlife, because this barn was determined eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places, even though it was deteriorated and its condition was not great, it still did exhibit really strong integrity. You can see, all the original materials are there. You can read it as a barn. And so Fish and Wildlife, as again, compensation or as mitigation for having to remove this, agreed to dismantle it, allowing those salvaged materials to be utilized by other owners of heritage barns in rehab projects that they were undertaking. This is sort of one of the great offshoots of the Heritage Barn program, and it's something that we realized kind of relatively early on, that oftentimes materials, you can get people to help with the labor, people want to join in and help out, but oftentimes it's the materials that are hard to come by. Even if you have the money for them, sometimes you can't get them. In some of these large barns, you've got 12 by 12, hewn beams that make up the structural portion of the building. So, so we learned that when there are instances of barns needing to be removed for whatever reason, and oftentimes, sometimes it is federal agencies or even state agencies from that matter, that if we find out about them, we try and work with them to, again, dismantle, to deconstruct, and then, oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way there. And then make those materials available. And we work with the network of heritage barn owners that we have that are, again, as you heard yesterday, 792 strong with the number of owners with listed barns, and offer those materials. So that's what happened here. You can see, even though the outside was a little rough, there's still some really good material inside. And this was a big barn. So if you look at this kind of truss post system, this was one of perhaps 20 or 24 as you go down the barn on either side. And then in addition, you see some of these rounded poles, rafter poles, again, which can be hard to find. And this barn was full of a lot of them. And so Fish and Wildlife, to their credit, worked with the contractor to dismantle the barn and salvage what could be salvaged. And I just want to focus on a few of the projects, some small, some bigger, that utilize this material and now we're able to get a rehabbed barn or a portion of their barn as a result of this portion. And so the first one's the Cross Creek Barn. It's in Thurston County. It's a llama and alpaca farm. And so you see some of their livestock there, but they had a wall that they needed to replace, some framing that needed to be done. They were able to use some of the salvage material, include it with some of newer material that they were using to shore up some of the structural deficiencies that this barn had. And again, just being able to get access to some of those larger beams. And ultimately, they were able to reframe and re-side this one side of the barn. They're working to go around the barn. Oftentimes these projects will happen in phases, but they were able to use this and make sure that this barn would still be standing. Another one is the ECKHOLM barn in Island County. Again, a barn that is just a nice, wonderful little gable barn. They had at one point lost siding. The other sides of this barn still have their original wood siding, vertical board and batten, I believe, but they had lost the siding on this side, and you could see they had to add these corrugated metal panels to help protect the barn. From the yellow barn that came down, they were able to get some other siding. And so now you can see here, picking the siding boards that worked for them, installing them on the barn, and then ultimately getting all the way down the line. And then once you get your salvaged boards up, you get the battens on them as well and seal it up from wind and rain entering at the seams. Then you get to painting it, and all done by the family who received the salvage material. And then you have essentially your restored side that now matches the other sides where they had lost the board and batten siding. So this barn, we like to think this barn is whole again from that standpoint. And the owners were just very grateful to be able to get the material. The last one I want to show is the REUBLE barn in Island County, and a special thanks to Tekla Cunningham and her husband David for sending images recently of this. And I think Tekla's on the line as well here. But they, back to perseverance and determination, took on the great project of the REUBLE barn. And again, we have the barn here, but the REUBLE farm in Island County sits within Eby's Landing National Historical Reserve on Whidbey Island. And this is another one of those properties that is truly a farm complex. This barn is just one building. They have, I think, actually 2 or 3 other smaller barns on the site as well as other outbuildings. So it's this great complex overall. And you can just see some of the levels of deterioration that were present. These, if you scroll in closely, you see that these are hornets' nests. So those had just been propagating inside the walls of the barn, and of course the overgrowth of brush and blackberries and everything else. But using the salvage material, they were able to come in and do structural work that utilized some of the larger rounded logs in from the yellow barn in Little Rock to help in what was the milking parlor area of the dairy barn. They were able to use other posts in another structure. You can see it really enabled them to reframe the structure, adding the concrete piers in there, and then going with the being able to reframe the building with some of the larger members. And I would have to, Tekla can maybe jump into the chat. I'd have to have her provide the details. But as I recall, there was actually a barn floor in here that would have been at the level of the concrete piers. It was actually raised up above the ground. But she may have to confirm that. I might be mixing it up with another barn. But in any event, I think at some point that is in the plans. And so here's one of the gable ends of the larger gambrel roof barn that they have, showing some of the interior framing, but again, where they were able to kind of feather in siding, keep what was good, replace what needed to be replaced. And then finished product, just working on the details of rehabbing existing wood windows and getting them back in, of replicating barn doors that were on the exterior of the building. And ultimately, they were able to bring this building back and one other one on the site as well. And this all was really, again, I think made feasible because of the material that they were able to use. Material costs a lot, and they were able to get that from the salvage program. Which, if it wasn't clear, we offer it free to barn owners. It's not something they have to pay for. It is something that they're responsible for, the transportation of material from the salvage site, but the salvage material is free when it's available. So yeah.
I'll just say that Tekla was chiming in the chat, and she
said,
great. That Bruce ECKHOLM from the previous barn helped them remove the bees, and so it's good to note. And then she said there was no floor in the pole barn, but they are hoping to add one at some point.
Got it.
So that, to clarify that point.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Tekla, for jumping in. Really appreciate it, and great work on these barns. So I oddly was charging my phone and left it in the other room. So I don't know what time it is. How are we on questions? Do we have some time for questions?
We have a little time. So
okay.
It is 12:49. So we've got about 10 minutes. And we do have a few questions lined up from folks. The first one that came in was asking if any barns originally used a lime wash for exterior wall protection. And of the grants that I've worked with, Chris, I've not really seen that. And I know Michael Hauser is in the chat. Maybe he knows of any historic barns in Washington that use that. But what do you?
I mean, certainly we see barns that have milking parlors or that were dairies, especially that milk room area would often have and I don't know if it was lime wash so much as a calcium carbonate kind of wash. Some of that might have had a lime component to it, but I've not seen it on exteriors. I've seen it really more in interior spaces, and that was, you know, a kind of best practices from the standpoint of cleanliness and having the right interior, you know, space for a milking parlor. I don't know how long that practice lasted, but we certainly still do see barns that have that whitewash on the interior.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know about the exterior. Maybe if Michael has any other thoughts, he can throw it into the chat as well.
So I don't see Michael responding, but feel free to chime in. We'll keep checking on the chat box. Another question came in through the Q&A. What are your views on metal roofs versus laminate options on historic barns? So I'll go ahead and jump in on that one. There are some laminate materials that are allowed on historic barns, but we certainly would prefer basically as close to original as possible. So we certainly understand that wood shingles and shakes are not always feasible for various reasons, like cost and sometimes fire danger and other reasons. So our preferred material, if the original material can't be used, is metal roofing, because it is the material that was sort of most available historically. Even if the barn didn't have originally a metal roof, it still honors the historic character of that barn. So the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation has put together a really handy barn roof replacement PDF guide that basically kind of ranks things from like best practices down to, you know, allowable but not preferred. And then of course there are some options that are not allowed at all. So we can send that PDF out to all participants today. But basically, if at all possible, to use metal instead of laminate, that's much more preferred. And then of course, beautiful wood shingles are always welcome on a project, but not always feasible. Michael Hauser says, Chris is correct, hard to know for sure without a chemical analysis, going back to that lime question. So good work, Chris.
Sometimes I get lucky.
And then we have some people saying yes please to the barn roof PDF. And then I think maybe our last question, unless any more come in the next couple minutes, is what level of flexibility is given to a reimagined purpose for a barn complex, for example, a public event facility?
Yeah.
So this is a tricky question because the grant program does not restrict use. However, some uses require changes to a building that are not compatible with the grant program. So, you know, if you're trying to make a lot of changes to an interior, you know, adding walls and insulation and a lot of things that wouldn't have been there historically, that's not going to be compatible for the grant program. However, it's a delicate balance between allowing a barn that maybe doesn't have an agricultural use anymore because the land around it has changed its ownership and changed use, but still wanting to put together a grant project that can, you know, help preserve that historic barn because it still has value even if it's not being used as a barn anymore. So unfortunately, there's no easy answer. Other than it's a delicate balance, and trying to make a new use compatible with the historic features of the barn is sometimes tricky. And that's part of the reason why for the grant program specifically, barns in agricultural use do get that extra consideration in the process, because it's more compatible with the parameters of the grant program, and also the grant program was designed to support agricultural use of land as well, but it certainly is possible to upgrade the use of a barn. It just can get a little complicated and nuanced.
And there have been, I mean, we've definitely done some barns that are conversions and are used for other purposes now. There's, as Jay mentioned, like everything, it's a spectrum. Some conversions can be really, really good and absolutely adhere to the standards and really, I think, are sensitive to the historic nature. Others, maybe not so much because they require interior walls and drywall and whatever it might be, and you know, that wouldn't be a part of it. But we've definitely done some conversions through the program, or the owners have done, because as Jay mentioned, we don't regulate use in any way, shape, or form. It's just dealing with the building. The other thing I would note too is the easement that is required is a temporary easement, 5, 10, or 15 years, based on how large the grant award is. And so during the term of that easement, yes, we will review potential alterations or changes to the barn that you might make. Once your easement is expired, you know, there's no more review. Not that we want people to do things that would drastically alter the character, but once the easement's up, there's no more review. So I'm sensing another session, barn conversions and how to do them sensitively. So
I think
yeah.
that would be very popular, because some of the posts I've seen on Facebook in correlation with this, that people commented of like, oh, I'd love to convert a barn for this use or that use. So I think people would be interested. And we've got some great examples of that in our grant program. But, you know, if people want to make more extreme changes and they're able to do that on their own, those are cool projects too. So we do have a couple of questions.
I see two quick ones. Yeah.
More. So where Virginia or Ginger asked where funding comes from, which is a really great question, and I'm glad she asked. So this program is funded through the Washington State capital budget, which is why it's a 2-year grant cycle, because it correlates with the legislative cycle. So the Washington Trust, as a nonprofit advocacy organization, we do a lot of work to educate our legislators about the importance of this program, and advocate for continued funding to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation to manage this program. So there is a legislative session coming up, and we're going to be asking all of you barn lovers to let your representatives know that this is an important program and that barns are important to Washington. So stay tuned for that, because sign up for our email list and you'll get notifications about contacting your representatives in the coming months, because they're going to be making those decisions in the early part of next year. And then I have a question from Terry Towner about where does a person get information on if a building was painted or stained, where would we get an analysis, and what is the best kind of paint to use on a building? I don't know a lot of specifics about paint. I know that some preservation consultants can do paint analysis and can kind of look at the layers of paint if there is some on the barn. But do you have any?
Yeah, you know, it can sometimes be hard on barns that are really, really weathered, because in order to do paint analysis, you need layers of paint. And if they're really, really weathered, that paint may be gone. So, you know, that can be a difficult thing. In terms of the best type of paint, that can be really locational, right? Depending on where you are in the state. So the best advice I can give is find a reputable paint contractor who's done a lot of work, who knows the climate and the conditions that are present where your barn is. And, you know, work with them, see samples of what they've done in the past, because it's going to be different in different parts of the state. And it may even be different depending on what style your barn may be as well. And this is a good question also for DAP, for Michael Hauser and others at the department. I think Michael's even throwing a little bit of information in the chat about that. So the last question, a photo gallery of completed projects. There is one. It's not, well, I'm not sure if it's totally super comprehensive, but on the DAP website, there is images of barns that have received grants in each of the cycles, so you can see all of those. And I'm sure we'll throw up that website in the chat here, so people can see that. But we are right. Oh, go ahead, Jay. Did you have something else?
I was going to say, we've got some other images on our website as well. We kind of both have representations on our website. But we haven't put up images yet of the current round. So that's something we should get going on both our website and DAP's website. So we will get that up here in not too long and send out a link to that.
And there's one other question about conversions. I do think follow-up emails get sent out to registrants. We will try and put some locations or some images of conversions that have happened, so people can see some of those. There's some great ones. Whether they're wedding venues, one has been converted to a distillery, and there's others that we know about that weren't part of the grant program, of course, that are throughout the state as well. So that's fantastic. I wanted to just before I end, I wanted to share one last piece on the screen share here, and that was what we got from this came into our inboxes this morning. A real special thanks to Lewis County and the Board of County Commissioners from Lewis County, who officially declared this week as Barn Week. So we know there's great barns in Lewis County, some of which are, of course, on the register, and some of which have received grant funding as well. And we're just thrilled that they picked up on this and made it official, that we now have official Lewis County Barn Week for the week of September 21st to 24th. Really fun to see, and certainly brought a smile to our faces, and we appreciate the acknowledgement. Yeah. So with that, we are going to wrap up day 3. We hope that everyone enjoyed today's program and will join us again tomorrow, the last of our 4 Barn Week presentations. But it's really going to be wonderful. Harrison Goodall will be leading us on a video tour of the twin barns behind Jay right now, and Harrison is truly, he's a national treasure. He just knows so much about barns and is so wonderful to work with and is so gracious and generous with his time. So tune in tomorrow for sure. He'll point out major features of barn anatomy and discuss what it really takes to preserve and maintain these large-scale historic structures. It will also be at noon on Zoom tomorrow. So don't forget to register. You do need to register for that individually. Visit preservewa.org/barnweek to sign up. And then don't forget to head over to Facebook and Instagram to take part in the daily trivia contest. Those are continuing. If you post the correct answer, you'll be entered to win a set of Barnogram postcards, which were developed by Harrison himself as great little flashcards for barn preservation. And then we're also featuring different historic barns from across the state with some other bonus content. So do head on over there. If you haven't done so already, please do sign up for the Heritage Barn email list to get all the recordings of this week's programs and to stay up to date. And then finally, again, I think this was thrown out yesterday, but if you've enjoyed today's program and you're not yet involved with the Washington Trust, we certainly encourage you to become a member, help support the work we do across the state, not just with honoring and saving barns, but really all historic resources and sites and landscapes. So certainly would appreciate involvement that way as well. So thanks again for joining us. Thanks to Jay for helping out today and putting together the PowerPoint. And thanks to the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation for having this grant program to begin. With that, we'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you tomorrow.
Okay. Bye-bye.